All right, let's get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Cierra Delgado. I am on the marketing team here at Opus, and welcome to our webinar today on Everboarding, how to get 1% better every day with continuous learning. I'm really excited for this session. If you are new to an Opus webinar, just a few housekeeping rules to jump through. Questions and comments are welcome throughout the session. As an audience member, you can see us, but we cannot see you. So there are two ways to engage with our panelists during the session. You can request a live call-in, which will bring you into the call, or you can chat any questions in the you can drop your questions in the chat at any point. We'll make sure that they get answered during the session or saved for the end. As always, if you have to jump out, we have the session recorded. The recap will be featured on our blog, and if you registered, you'll get it in your email in just a few days. A few quick takeaways from today's session. If you haven't heard, we ran a L&D survey earlier this year where continuous learning came out as a top priority for L&D leaders for 2024. In today's session, we'll really try to unpack that. And then we're also going to discuss how you should approach increasing ongoing training for your team members in the spirit of Everboarding, and then ways for you to refresh your ongoing training programs to engage your teams, improve knowledge retention, and improve professional growth. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to each of our wonderful panelists. Christina, I'll kick it off to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Heilig. I am currently the Learning and Development Manager at Dewey's Pizza, former teacher turned instructional designer, communications and knowledge management manager, and getting back into the L&D space. So happy to be here. Thanks, Sarah.
My name's Cierra Miller. I'm the field operations manager here at the Bahama Bucks Support Center. I've been with Bahama Bucks for 15 years, and over this past year have been doing and designing a learning management platform for our franchisees and frontline crew members.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alfredo Ramirez. I'm the Learning Development Manager for Hornblower Group. I've been with Hornblower Group for a little over 2 years, about 2.5 years. And within that organization, I primarily oversee leadership development initiatives for our wonderful operational leaders across the globe. Prior to this, before hospitality, I was in higher education working on leadership development for stakeholders across
For the purposes of kind of formatting this discussion, we divided into two parts. So we're going to start off with defining what is Everboarding and how does it differ from terms like continuous learning and ongoing training. When we were putting together this webinar, we noticed that a lot of these terms are used interchangeably in the industry. So to get everybody on the same page, I think it's time to just weigh in and define what Everboarding actually is and how it differs in every organization. Christina, I want to start it off with you. When we had kicked off the session, you were like, I really just went straight to ChatGPT to kind of define what Everboarding is. And the definition it came back with was an extension of onboarding, which I think is a natural sort of play on the word of Everboarding. You have onboarding, which happens up front, and then the training that takes place afterward is where Everboarding comes in. But it really relies heavily on continuous engagement with your teams and identifying learning and development opportunities. So it's pretty vague because it's everything that happens after day one. How does that align with what you think Everboarding is?
It aligns nicely, and I think at Dewey's Pizza, we do a good job of really structuring the Everboarding in a way that it makes sense and people know what it is and they have that buy-in, and now it's just part of our culture. So something we do is, let's say you become a server. The onboarding is learning everything you need to know to just be able to do that job at its most basic level. You're competent, right? But you're not maybe excelling in the role yet or super efficient yet. So for us, we have IDP plans, internal development plans. So to be a server at Dewey's, you have 5 different plans that you progress through. And these plans are really like observation-based performance assessment tools. So the managers will do a quick shift setup and say, hey, today I'm going to be observing you doing XYZ, like 2 or 3 things. And then at the end of the shift, they'll have what is called a feedback loop, where the team member will be asked, like, what is one thing you did really well today? What is something that will take your performance to the next level next time? And then the manager will provide their feedback as well on the performance. So in that way, using our IDPs, it's a really structured way to have everboarding. And I don't know if you want me to pause at everboarding or continue on to like the differentiation between our ongoing training and continuous training beyond everboarding.
Let's kick it off to Cierra and Alfredo to kind of weigh in on everboarding, and then we'll get into the other terms.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So for me, I think everboarding is a really interesting term in that I think it sort of combines the idea of initial onboarding and ongoing learning. And it really blends them together in a way that, puts the employee and the crew members first and gives them a really good holistic view of, what skills they need to learn, but also what personal development skills they need to learn. And so, we know that onboarding is that initial introduction of company values, whether that be, procedures and processes. And then, training is the continuous learning, whether that again be processes, procedures, products, especially in our industry. But for us, at Bahama Bucks, I think, we have what's called a leveling system, and, we do intentional training and testing with our crew members to make sure that they understand the concepts and processes that we have put in place. So for us, everboarding really is, how do we develop not only the skills of our crew members, but how do we develop them as people, as managers, as crew members?
Yeah, I think in addition to what Cierra and Christina are saying, and kind of how we sum it up with at Hornblower Group, it's just we're focusing on the long-term success of our employees and the long-term success of our organization, right? When we stop at onboarding initiatives and we are focused so much on the early stages of how our employees are getting integrated to the company, we lose sight of that long-term vision and long-term objectives of our organization. And I know we're going to talk a little later on about how we get buy-in and things like that, but everboarding really is being able to think long term, look into the future, and say, what are some ways what are some tools that we are going to need as an organization to be successful, and how do we give that to our employees throughout the duration of their tenure with the organization? And I know one of the buzzwords I know we were talking about when we were prepping for this is intentionality and flexibility. Everboarding needs those components. I'm sure we'll go deeper into them, but we don't want to just do random things, right? We really want to sit down with ourselves within our L&D department,
You all
collaborate with our stakeholders,
things that I
to
think
say, hey,
it's like
what
if we
are
could
the
assemble a
things that
Venn
we need to
diagram,
accomplish in
I'm
1 year,
picking up
2
on,
years, 5,
there's
10,
an
and
element
then
of
be able to
having
implement that
internal
philosophy of
development
everboarding
plans and
to
leveling. So
support
you're
those
building
initiatives and the
skills.
growth
There's
of our
some kind of
employees.
progression. Everboarding should be this sort of linear path, but when we talk about it, it feels more holistic and kind of circular in the sense that everything should kind of go back to square one at some point. In terms of continuous learning and ongoing training, we had to unpack this in our kickoff and sort of be like, okay, what is the differences between the three? Alfredo, you kind of like alluded to it already. Everboarding is sort of the governing philosophy in a sense. And then between the three of you, where do you think continuous learning and ongoing training fit in?
I'd like to touch on something that Alfredo mentioned back with onboarding. He had mentioned tools, and I thought that was such a great call out that leans into that flexibility that's required of everboarding as well. Like, yes, we have structured leveling or IDPs. We also provide a suite of tools. And so a good example is at Dewey's Pizza, we worked with a consultant named Rudy Mick, Miick. And what he gave us was a whole set of communication tools called safe space tools, which help us communicate and collaborate as team members in the stores as smoothly and efficiently as possible. and also taught us things like how to stay out of drama with Cartman's drama triangle. So I think that also speaks to it too, the tools piece, the tools that can be used if and as needed throughout one's tenure. Um, Ongoing training to me is more specific. It's like, hey, which new process is there that we need to train on? Are we getting a new POS? Do we have new ovens? Do we have new menu items or LTOs? So to me, that's ongoing training. It's just ad hoc as needed. And then continuous learning seemed like a more comprehensive umbrella of personal growth and development that might even extend beyond the organization. So it could be joining a group like Chart and expanding your network in the industry. It could be getting a certification in the industry like the CHT. I think it could also be internal in the form of like discussion forums and learning from one another. Or like what we're going to do is create a little bite-sized series, we're calling it. And we're pulling folks from operations to do like quick 2-minute videos on something they do really well. Like, hey, I don't think difficult conversations are difficult, and this is why, and this is my approach. Great. We get that quick hit 2-minute video, and then we can link out additional resources for whomever wants to learn more about that. So to me, that's continuous learning. It's just like the broader umbrella of nonstop development, but sometimes in more nuanced ways, especially with like leadership skills and interpersonal skills. Those come to mind.
Yeah, at Bahama Bucks, we're really focused on not only the ongoing training, we've utilized Opus, and we're actually launching next week with a set of around 50% of our shops. And that platform is really going to be designed to provide ongoing training and learnings for all of our frontline crew members. That's just one more tool that we are trying to utilize to provide and give our crew members the best success and the best, pathway to success in their shops. But yeah, Christina's definitely right. Continuous learning is really more of the higher level stuff to me. And Bahama Bucks also invests a lot in that. And we have what's called Bahama Bucks University, where we're not only teaching the hard skills of Bahama Bucks, how to make a shaved ice, how to make a smoothie, but how can we be better leaders, better people, lead our teams well to be successful, and create teams that work well and that are dynamic and are able to solve problems, well, effectively, all of those things. So, both of those, the ongoing training and the continuous learning go hand in hand for us here at Bahama Bucks.
I won't repeat too much about the ongoing training because I think Cierra and Christina captured it beautifully. But in terms of the continuous learning, one way that we have begun to approach this and instill within an organization, because we do believe continuous learning is kind of, I know Christina mentioned like the umbrella. For us, it's kind of the roots, right? In order for these other things, everboarding, onboarding, to happen and flourish, we need strong roots that's grounded in this idea of continuous learning, continuous learners, right? And what we have done over the past year, actually just a few months ago, is when we hosted our first company-wide leadership training, that philosophy of I am a continuous learner, I have room to grow, I have room to support my team in new ways, support my organization, was grounded in every single section of our leadership training, which was 9 weeks long, right? So we have begun to realize the need to instill within our leaders, like, hey, we don't always know the best things to do. Sometimes we need to seek out new information, whether that's we use our LMS, which we call Hornblower University, or we attend webinars, or we reach out to our learning development team to get some training tools and tips. So, we have really approach continuous learning from that kind of roots perspective of we need to kind of instill this in order for all training initiatives to be successful, and that for our operational leaders to recognize, hey, this is not just something we're checking off the list. This is something that's helping our organization
L&D leaders
grow,
who come into an organization where continuous learning isn't already a priority. We're going to get into getting buy-in, but I want from like each of your experiences, was this something that that already existed at, like, say, Bahama Bucks or Dewey's Pizza or Hornblower Group, or was it something that you kind of had to champion as the sort of like L&D manager?
Yeah, I think Bahama Bucks, and I don't know if it's just my personal like love for the company, but I feel very grateful in the fact that the idea of continuous learning as a core value has been a part of who we are from the very beginning. So Blake Buchanan, our founder and CEO, he spends an hour every day listening to podcasts or reading a book, trying to continuously develop his own skills. And so that's been a foundational part of who we are. And, because of that, I've become a champion for ongoing learning. And it's instilled in us as members of the Bahama Bucks community.
Totally. It's coming at the end of the day, it's going to come from the top.
Yes. Yep.
I'll say for Hornblower Group, learning and development has had a very short history, right? So as I mentioned, I've been here 2.5 years. My supervisor, Eric Reed, has been here about a year in addition to that, and that he was the first person in this role. So as an organization, right, we can pinpoint that about 3.5 years ago is when we said, all right, we're going to really focus on learning development. That doesn't necessarily mean that continuous learning was not here, because I do believe that everybody in some shape or form as an individual wants to be better, wants to seek out more information. They may not always have the tools or the language of how do I go about that, which is why we now as a department exist to provide those tools. So, it's hard to say as an organization, has Hornblower always been like that? Because I don't know, because I've only been here right for the 2.5 years. But in terms of where we're going, right, one of our operating principles is being innovative. We latch on to that idea and attach it to this concept of continuous learning. And so our L&D department now exists to provide those tools. And we have seen some really positive feedback from our operational leaders everywhere as to, wow, this is really great to have things like the LMS that gives me leadership content that I can grow in, leadership sessions and webinars. So I'll say that, it's really blossoming in terms of where it's at now and where it's going to go. But that does take champions. So I do think our L&D, our training professionals, we are the champions of these types of concepts, right? And not only just being able to say, hey, continuous learning, we also need to make sure that it's the concept is digestible, right, to folks in the field, right? Because we all know within our industry, we love our buzzwords. We love our words that we throw around and we all get them. But the operations are not necessarily saying, what continuous learning are we going to do today, right? They're not necessarily using those phrases. So we have responsibility to understand how our operations work, to understand how those leaders work, and how they like to receive information. And being able to create that relationship is imperative to make sure
it's
that
the only reason we have a
learning,
term now is
Everboarding
because you're right, these
initiatives
buzzwords
are able to stay alive.
we finally think of ways to kind of encapsulate. Something that came out of our L&D survey that I found really interesting between like QSR and FSR restaurants is where they kind of front load a lot of training. Within like quick service, it's more disseminated over time. I think from like a labor perspective, it's conservative and like cost effective to do it that way. Whereas like in full service restaurants, they are a little bit more traditional in the sense like, okay, you do have this week of like heavy on the go, like on the job training. So I think everybody's in a time of like where they're trying to either adapt or really like dig their heels in this idea of like, okay, we know that there's a labor shortage. We know that turnover is high. We need to keep these team members engaged and we can't rely on what we did before. In terms of like examples of how, you can't just say we're doing continuous learning and every day we're going to have a new lesson. Can you give an example of how you've been able to communicate this to either like field managers or to like frontline team members directly, like, we are investing in your long-term development and here's how we're going to do it?
Yeah, I think I could speak to that because we're at that point where it has been historically a little bit difficult for us to provide the kind of training that folks wanted as far as continuous learning, especially at the manager level. We were kind of like flying folks in maybe once a year or so and having a big group session in person. And there's just so much more that folks want to learn. And we're hearing from managers, like in our employee satisfaction surveys or sentiment surveys, they want continuous learning. And to Alfredo's point, like they're not always going to say it in those words, but they're like, I'm struggling with this. I wish someone would show me how to do X, Y, Z, or what does good even look like, right? And so we just have to have our eyes and ears open to see like where are the opportunities. And I'm just really grateful because we are implementing our first learning platform, and that will enable us to provide at such a greater cadence and in different modalities. So I'm imagining that we can have live virtual training sessions that are then recorded, and you can watch it at a later time if you want. We have discussion forums. We have a new collaborative classroom space coming that's online. So I think the opportunity is really ripe and folks are excited about it, which I'm grateful for. But yeah, I'll pause there. I think the desire to improve the circumstances there, and we're meeting them to solve for that gap. So it's exciting.
It sounds like you've enacted like a really good feedback loop though, to even, respond in the right ways. Cause I think like typically it's like, okay, more training just means like more course load, more assignments. And that's not necessarily what it is, especially in hospitality when not everybody gets the luxury of, spending an hour off the floor.
That's true. And I'll piggyback a little bit to focus away from continuous learning into the ongoing training. That does become an issue where there's everything we want to train on all at once at the same time. And so we do need a prioritization strategy for those kind of requests. So we have designed our own in-house training needs prioritization tool that is weighted and scored, and it helps us see where we're going to get the most bang for our buck, like which should be prioritized this quarter. And so I've asked for a seat at the exec table at the end of each quarter to show what we believe are the top 2 or 3 priorities to focus on for the following quarter. And it's a great way to just get feedback on like, yeah, I agree with that. Or actually, I think this other thing should be prioritized first. And then we'll seek out that data to make sure that it actually does make sense over the 2 or 3 priorities that we've proposed. But that gets exec buy-in, which then, trickles down to like our RM buy-in, GM buy-in. People start to get excited about it, especially when we can put the data to it. Like this will save you an hour a day. And then for us, we know that translates into dollars a day, right? And so it gets exciting when you can do that. So having a strategy for prioritizing, I think, is really important so that you're not trying to do everything at once and nothing well.
I hear you. We actually have a quick question in the chat from Kathleen. Christina, what platform are you going to? Sounds like it has great functionality.
It feels weird saying it on another platform's webinar.
Okay, so we're no stranger to competition. It's a friendly spirit. I mean, we try to invite like every perspective between Opus. Oh, looks like Cierra, maybe she'll rejoin us. Whether it's like customers or not, but you're more than welcome to share.
Okay. We did thorough analysis, and we are a big fan of Opus. I'm going to continue watching Opus. But what made sense for us right now, especially because of those IDPs and our plans for discussion forums and different things, we went with Scoots, and we're in the process of implementing Scoots at this time. It's like school, but with an X at the end instead of an L.
Alfredo, I'll kick it off to you. Yes. Yes. I know. Listening to Christina is also listening to you, it's like church. But
Can we repeat the question? I was listening so deeply to Christina and loving what she's saying. I'm like, wait a minute, what's the question?
Is can you give an example of how you've been able to communicate to either your field managers or your frontline team members that continuous learning is really valued in the organization without saying, continuous learning matters and here's why?
Yeah, I think Christina said kind of what we do, but I'll rephrase in terms of what we have done. A lot of it does come to those conversations, and Christina said a great way, having a seat at the exec table. Outside of that, we check in pretty regularly with the way our organization is structured. We have kind of our COOs, and then that kind of goes right down to general managers. There's really no level in between there. And then our general managers, at least in terms of our US functions, which is primarily where a lot of our L&D efforts go to, at least at this moment, since we're still early stages. We do a lot of check-ins with our general managers, and we don't do it to say, hey, what's some new learning things that you want? It really is to say, hey, what's going well? What's not going well? What can we do to help? And that is where a lot of our continuous learning, everboarding initiatives have come out of. Our leadership training that we did, that I keep mentioning, because that was kind of our biggest accomplishment this year, came out of the fact that we just had conversations with our leaders at every level of the organization. And they said, this is what we need. This is what we envision it, but we trust you to execute it. And we involve them at every step of the way, which I don't think any training professional is going to say not to do that, right? When we involve our stakeholders along the process of continuous learning initiatives, you don't even really need to get buy-in, right? Because by the time you have a product, they see themselves in the product. And that's kind of another way that we've been able to approach continuous learning, is find a way so our operational leaders see themselves in what you're executing. Because it's so easy. I think every professional that's here on the panel, on the call, can say this is the best thing we should be doing. And I don't think anybody's gonna say, no, that's not a bad thing. But that's where I mentioned before, intentionality. Intentionality includes incorporating those stakeholders so they see themselves in the initiatives you're executing. So that is mostly how we go about that, right? We also jump on our general manager calls. And sometimes we don't even speak, right? We'll just kind of listen as to what's going on. We may have a few updates, but hearing the day-to-day stuff, that has given us ideas to say, maybe we propose this because we heard, our general manager in Chicago said they're struggling with communication issues, or there's conflict resolution issues going on in Boston. What are some ways we can tie all this together to support the operations? But that's all come from active listening, right? Us being able to let go of what we think should be happening, even though we have the expertise to do that. Sometimes we have to let that ego go a little bit and just listen, digest, and say, where are the possibilities that we can support and execute? That's really what we're here to do, right? We're not here for our own egos. We're here to support our operations, support our organization, support those employees that are getting our organization's goals accomplished. So really kind of checking in with your people, and of course, it's going to look different based on each organization, but figuring out where are those ways that Christina said you can get your seat at a table, wherever your scope is. And then the last piece on that, as I'm talking about scope, is you have to know your scope, right? Where within the organization do you sit? Is it appropriate for you to have access across all levels?
Can I get an
if
amen
not,
in
being
the
able
chat?
to figure out how do I determine where my scope of influence is when it comes to
welcome
implementing
back,
these
Cierra.
initiatives, and really leaning into
still
that and figuring out how to leverage that
Sorry,
in the execution.
I came back in the middle of Alfredo of his talk, but I did want to just say, for him, like for us, the idea of letting go that ego is so true, right? As someone in a corporate office, hearing feedback can sometimes be hard, and when we think that the content and the material that we're creating, we think it might be the end all be all, right? And it might be just that magic bullet that's going to fix everything. But when people come back and they say, actually, these are the things that we need help with and that we're struggling with, the point is to not be defensive, right? The point is to say, you know what, maybe we do need to look at this a different way and come up with better solutions that might be better suited to what you're seeing in the field, because it can be difficult when I'm sitting in an office and there's people that are actually out there talking to guests every day and working in a physical location, and so the things that I see are not necessarily what they see, and so just being receptive to that feedback to be able to figure out and find solutions that work for everybody is really important. At Bahama Bucks, we have what's called the Snow Advisory Council, which is comprised of franchisee representatives from all of our different regions. And, that can be a humbling experience to sit in on those meetings and to hear what they have to say. But I do think that in order for us to help them grow, we have to take that feedback and then provide them with better materials to help them learn.
That's amazing. And also, as like a new partner with Opus, I have actually been in your content this week, and I love I know that you guys are laying out all of the different paths and for your levels so that everybody's getting the correct training at the right time. And I love Bahama Bucks content because it's so on brand and so personalized too. Not just collecting feedback. I want to say it was maybe Christina of Alfredo who kind of hinted at this idea of like making sure that the learning experience feels personalized. It's just a quick way to make sure that you're connecting with the team member on a one-to-one basis, even if it's through a training course. So I think this is a perfect segue into part 2, which is building a culture of continuous learning. So Everboarding is important. It's a philosophy and it's existed. It's everything that happens after onboarding. Continuous learning seems to be more of the culture and what you really need to, as Alfredo said, dig your roots in so that you can get buy-in from other departments, so that you can really champion the spirit of learning within your organization. And some things that came up in our kickoff that I wanted to just immediately call out is buy-in is like incredibly important. And then strategizing for the long term and the short term, because this stuff doesn't happen overnight. You need to set those short-term goals to show that like you're moving the needle in the right direction. Cierra, I'll kick it off to you first. So Bahama Bucks being a franchise, your buy-in is a little bit different from Christina and Alfredo's in the sense that you're working really, really closely with your franchisees.
Yes. Yeah. And so for us, Alfredo talked about this earlier, but, trying to get those C-suites and the C-level executives, get them to buy in. And for him, the idea of the learning department is really new. But for us, like I said, it's integral to who Bahama Bucks is as a corporation. And so for us, it's always been top down. And so, getting our buy-in is convincing our franchisees that it's worth it, right? How do we convince them to put their dollars, time, and effort into the idea of continuous learning? Because in the hospitality industry, we know that continuous learning is so important to, retaining our crew members, but also, having that relationship with our guests, right? Both of those things go hand in hand, and they're both really important. And so for us, getting the buy-in is really more showing our franchisees that, whatever it is that we're planning on implementing is worth it. It's going to help them, with their crew members. It's going to help with retention. So that's training dollars, that's efficiency dollars, cost of labor, all of those things. But in the end, our Bahama Bucks goal is to bless every guest that walks into our door. And if we can do that through training, that's a repeat guest who spends more, comes back more often, and then tells the others about Bahama Bucks. And so that's a win-win on every front for us. And so, whenever we're explaining or we're trying to get buy-in from our franchisees, we have to lay out how on every level, whatever it is that we're doing is going to help them with those initiatives.
Of course. I love that you have like you take into account that like what the franchisee wants and what your team wants are more or less the same things. And because it's a franchisee with like the same concept, the success of one location does drive the success of another. So everybody in a way is kind of knitted together. Christina, I know that when we were talking about getting buy-in, you relied heavily on like relationship building and this idea of expanding your zone of influence. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so again, I was lucky to come into an organization that already values training and development. One of our values is literally we grow through training, goal setting, and development, Aaron. And so that was already there. So what I wanted to do is understand the pain points or opportunities within each department to really understand what is their number one thing that they would like to tackle. And so one of the questions when I was having these informational interviews with each department head was like, what keeps you up at night? What are you worried about? You know what I mean? And it was fun to kind of like, it was neat because I could tell a lot of them had never been asked that question too. So they were like, oh, safe space. I'll tell you 5 things, And so then what it becomes is like, all right, well, what is a long-term initiative? Like, what is something that is long-term. We can simmer over a long time and just like drip content and experiences and measure, closing the gap in performance. What is like mission critical right now and just needs to be taken care of? What is just more like foundational content that we need to like schedule in? And it's interesting because we have different departments excited about training being able to help them. And it's just a matter of using that prioritization tool to say like, I know we want to do all of this, but here's where we need to focus. And that's a good feeling. And so I think just maintaining those relationships and living another one of our values of we hold ourselves and each other accountable will be really important to maintaining that trust and rapport and desire for additional training. And lastly, I'll say when I am meeting with these different department heads and learning what their pain points are, I'm trying to find those metrics or KPIs that line up with those. And then what I want to do is measure like the current state versus the desired state. And then post implementation of that training initiative, seeing if we've closed that gap. And if you can bring that data back, that's huge. It speaks for itself. You're not trying to convince anyone about your value. It speaks for itself. So I'll stop there.
I feel like this has such a good, you're teeing up Alfredo to talk about when you mention informational interviews. It's like expanding your scope by sitting in with other departments. Alfredo, I know that your day-to-day is heavily involved with other teams.
Yeah, so of course it ebbs and flows, right, in terms of what we do. But one of our philosophy for our small but mighty department of two is finding ways to touch base with multiple departments across our organization, especially since we're all over the place, right? So we have a unique kind of thing going on that we're, my supervisor and I are both remote. We have to really put ourselves out there and say, hey, let's do some check-ins. And what we have noticed, especially with this idea of building a culture of continuous learning, which I will say we are actively in. Like when I tell you seeds are planted, they're kind of sprouting out a little bit, but we are still 2.5 years later in this active process. I mean, we have been able to even notice the results, though, even from 2 years ago when we went out into the field. And we usually try to do this at least once a year, if not twice. Go out to the field, go to every single place, take all that time out of our calendars to really get in the field with operational leaders. 2 years ago, we were the compliance guys. That's it. There was nothing else associated with us. Now we get calls, we get things. Hey, we're having communication issues. We need some trainings and things like this. So our value has been developed, when we think about in terms of how it's attributed to continuous learning, of making sure people are educated on what it is that L&D and training departments do. Again, we have to kind of get off our own autopilot and recognize that not everybody knows what we do. They have their own perception. For our organization, the majority of it was compliance training. And for one small period of time, 2 years ago, that was the priority. Now it's like 5% of our yearly responsibility. Now it's mostly HR. But it's just an example of, you have to get out there. You get your value and your buy-in by being able to demonstrate exactly what it is that you're able to do and executing on that, following through with your commitments. But you figure all this out by reaching out, by figuring out the best modes of doing that. For us, I'll say we're very lucky in that we can just kind of email, hey, let's catch up and check in. We have a large organization, but it still sometimes has a very small feel, and that we do have that access to our different leaders, not even just in our food and beverage operations, but in sales, in marketing, throughout many different levels of our organization. So again, continuous learning requires that collaboration. It cannot just be led solely by L&D and training professionals in an organization. We have to involve folks into the process. And if we involve them early, not too late, again, like I mentioned earlier, buy-in is kind of just automatic at that point, right? We have that relationship. They see themselves in finished products and finished initiatives, and we don't have to do too much work if we're willing to put the work in the beginning. Which I think sometimes we get, and we've done that. We've had our share of failures. We've had our share of, let's just do this program. Let's do this. This sounds great. And they flopped, right? They flopped because, again, when we think back 3 years ago, we jumped into it because we're the training folks, right? So we need to be able to do this. This is what our call to action is, or job descriptions. So over time we had to redirect our own selves, right? To say, no, let's try this approach. And we've been able to see a lot of success with the approach of,
Absolutely.
before we
I
start
think
getting too
that
deep into this,
something that you
let's
touched on
talk to our
is,
people and
it's
make sure that everything
you can be really
aligns.
lucky
And
walk
that's
into
how
an
you build
organization
this
where
culture of
continuous learning is already
learning. And
present,
eventually
but
they reciprocate that as well by
tactical
reaching
day
out
to
to
day of
us
like
for those
maintaining the
tools.
relationships and being attentive to other needs and being able to position L&D to every other department. Those are things that I think a lot, like even the most tenured L&D professionals still not necessarily struggle with, but it changes depending on your organization. Um, Yes, and Christina, I'll kick it off to you. In terms of like the work that you've been able to do at Dewey's Pizza, in terms of bringing in a consultant, what from your past experiences in learning development have kind of what lessons have you taken with you in terms of relationship building, influencing others, and then also handling objections?
A big one. It feels a little nervous. I feel a little nervous saying this, but it's being real, being realistic. Like, I have a master's degree in instructional design. I know I'm not going to approach my projects from that frame of mind. I know that the business wants something done. They want it done quickly and they want realistic solutions. And I can't just like send them everything as I would like back in my college days, right? So I think speaking the business language, I also have an MBA that was intentional. I did that because I wanted to show like, no, I understand business as well. I understand this is important to you. So I can speak both. And I find like a happy medium to connect with them on a human level and just say like, what do you need done? What's going on? What's your pain point? What do you think would be a good solution? Or why is this happening? Or at what time of day? Or with less tenured individuals or more tenured? And so just asking questions in a really simple way to get to the root of something has been really helpful. Even better than that is going and observing or actually doing the work. So my first month at Dewey's, I actually was trained in almost every single role in a restaurant and worked just as the rest would, and so that also buys you some rapport and some trust equity. And then when it's time to actually design and develop training, you actually have like an inside view and you have a pretty good foundation of almost like a subject matter expert view of the content that needs to be created or the learning experiences. The last thing I would say is really, as Alfredo has already mentioned, pulling people in from ops or whatever the department is, if it's IT, pulling in the IT folks, having them at the beginning of the project and helping them realize that they are just as integral to the outcomes as I am, right? Like, it isn't a one-person show. I'm like the vessel or the modality, but they're the experts, and we literally need each other to make this successful. So we recently reimagined our back of house kitchen training, and we leveraged 18 operations subject matter experts at different levels. And I'll tell you, they were so appreciative and like, wow, that was so cool. And like, we got awesome feedback, and we hear from their supervisors that they're telling their supervisors how cool that was. And, we publicly recognize them. And then we'll always be giving them like first access to like the content to like provide feedback or any other suggestions before it goes live. There's one other thing I wanted to touch on there. It slipped my mind, but anyway, we have a lot of fun with it. It's like, just work with the people, and they want to help, they want to be involved. And so give them that opportunity. So yeah, we have fun with it.
It sounds like fun. Cierra, I thought you were about to jump in at one moment.
Well, it's so interesting because, for me, I don't have a background in learning and development, but I do have a background in operations. And so it's sort of the flip flop from Christina for me, where it's like, I am now designing, content and learning initiatives around the things that I have already known how to do. And so I feel like it makes it a little bit more relatable. And not that, Christina, you're not relatable, but it makes it easier for me to connect with those people because I feel like there's already that trust there because they know that I've done what I'm asking them to do. So it's just a different dynamic, which I think is interesting.
But the through line, I think, between everybody is this idea of like, well, what's in it for me? Like, if you want me to care about this initiative, what's in it for me? And each of you have to think about that constantly. And make sure that like you're speaking the other department's language or speaking the operator's language. Cierra, I wanted to talk about like in terms of coming from an operations background and embracing L&D for the first time. How like how are you, I guess learning on the job and then also rolling out training at the same time?
Yeah, it's been an interesting experience. And I've talked about the idea of continuous learning, being a part of Bahama Bucks like culture in general. But one thing that we really identified in the last 12 months is that we are missing in that link between corporate franchisee to frontline crew member. That link in the middle of the franchisee was dropped out, and so we're trying to figure out how to connect what we want our franchisees to tell our crew that doesn't always necessarily happen. And so trying to bridge that gap has really been such an interesting journey for us, I would say. And I think, we, as you said, we just started with Opus. And so that really is our toolbox that we're trying to utilize to get in and create that learning and create that content. And so for us, like, we're recognizing, like, we've thought we've had this great platform for training, and we had all the materials, but now as we're tweaking it and adjusting it to make it frontline accessible, it's been a journey. it's been so interesting because for me, like I said, I've been there and I've done it, and I'm just so used to thinking, oh, it's this easy, but it's never just that easy. And trying to create the learning platform to express that to somebody who may not know it is hard.
Yes, I'm cluing into the chat here. Christina, thank you for dropping in. I love it when you remember something because somebody else is talking. Taryn also dropped in a really good morsel. If you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. Christina, really quickly, do you want to share what you dropped in the chat?
Oh, sure. I just had remembered, like, the thing that I forgot to say is when we're working with multiple subject matter experts, whether they be from operations or wherever, actually, this specific example that I'm thinking of was from operations. And what was so interesting was you would have one SME say something about how they rotate the ovens, let's say. And then we'd have another one say, actually, I don't, because what we found is XYZ. And so we found inconsistencies, but then also areas of opportunity to do something better or differently than we had always been doing it, because we had this voice coming out of someone who discovered something new that we would have otherwise never knew about, right? So I think having multiple SMEs is also really helpful to see, like, are our expectations and what good looks like as concrete as we thought, and do we have people who are doing things better or differently? So I thought that was really fun to explore.
I love that because, Bahama Bucks, the exact same thing. We as we learn different and get feedback from people, it's always so fun to learn new and better ways to do something that you never knew. So yeah, I love that.
I think learning and development, there's tension with like L&D and operations because your objectives are very similar, but the way you go about work is very, very different in terms of like how operations sees the world and how L&D sees the world. It's something that I think what we notice with customers who are trying to expand and grow really, really fast. So Alfredo, I want to make sure that we get as much time with you as possible. At the Hornblower Group, the Hornblower Group operates across so many different verticals, right? So when you're thinking about like finding inconsistencies, prioritizing those, sort of in the spirit and under the veil of continuous learning, what in your experience has made you really made you and your team really successful?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. So again, a lot of it, especially to the first part where you said there's, sometimes tensions. I don't think there needs to be. Again, I think the tensions happen because everybody's operating in their own kind of lane, and I personally believe L&D and training professionals are responsible for breaking that kind of tension, or being able to step out their lane and say, I'm willing to get into your lane so we can figure this out together. So a lot of our success has been on that collaborative approach. So I know one initiative that we spearheaded last year in terms of our employee recognition program. The task was to overhaul everything, right? Overhaul it, make it so it works for every business vertical, make it so it works for every department in that business vertical, and clean it up, make it work. A hefty task, which we easily were like, well, this is what we need to do. But we decided to dedicate a lot of weeks in incorporating multiple business verticals, from C-suite executives of those different verticals to then the next level of leadership, to come onto calls and to say, hey, conducting SWOT analysis, conducting these different analysis, say what's working, what's not, what do you need, what can we do? And so, for us, having those big initiatives where we really did involve people, we didn't just send out a survey, we didn't just say, oh, tell me your thoughts in passing, but showing, having them give the feedback into things that they want for their development or for whatever it may be, and then showing them this is the result of what you said. And then also our part is showing appreciation for that, right? We have a philosophy of really showing appreciation for everyone that contributes to L&D. We know that us too are not the only people making it happen. It is every leader. So we lead by example, and that we're saying, hey, we know that appreciation, affirmation is going to continue those positive results. So we make sure, whether it's in our company newsletters, whether it's on our calls, that we thank our operational leaders, because that's how they then begin to feel like they are a part of this learning development team as well. And that is what our philosophy is. We say we may lead these initiatives, but everyone contributes to them. And it's our responsibility to make sure that they have a seat at our table, right? We always talk about us having a seat at the exec table. We have an L&D table, and we want everybody to have a seat at this table as well, to be able to contribute and see themselves in the finished product. And that is how we work every single day. And the first quick question we always ask is, who is not here?
There are multiple tables to
not
consider.
Talking about this
I love that you incorporate praise into your weekly newsletters. I think something that we think about, we've been thinking about a lot at Opus, is just internal communications, and the simple act of communicating thanks or praise or shouting somebody out goes such a long way. I want to make sure that we get any questions from the audience, scanning through the chat. If you have a question for any of our panelists, feel free to drop it in. We have a few minutes left in the session. Or you can request a live call-in and join the call. Going once. Going twice. All right. Christina, Cierra, Alfredo, I will leave the floor open if you have any final remarks. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your expertise on this webinar session. It's been really, I think, illustrative for me as somebody new to the L&D scene, and also working at a company where one of our values is to get 1% better every day. I'd like to open up the floor for any final remarks before we close things out.
One thing I'll say, I know we talked about it when we were prepping for this, was our phrase that we operate in, is we don't over egg the omelet, right? So one of the biggest things when we think about what Everboarding, what continuous learning are we going to do, sometimes we get in our own way of our own success. So being able to stop and say, are we thinking too deeply about this? Let's just get back to basics, right? Let's talk to our people in the ways that we can, and really figure out what it is that Christina mentioned. What are the pain points? So don't get in our own way. I think that's the number one thing we have to do.
I think the only thing that I have to say is, it goes along with don't over egging the omelet, but don't lose the forest for the trees, right? Don't let the short term get in the way of your long term goals, right? For me, your short term goals should be tactics and your action items to help you with your long term strategy and your long term goals. So think of it in that way, and do your best every day.
Alrighty. Cool. Well, to our audience members who have hung on for the session, thank you so much for joining. What's next is you will get a recap and recording in your email inbox in the coming days from the session. Also an invitation to sign up for our July session on how to make the L&D work in a franchise model. You can also get invited to stay in the loop with any webinars or any happenings at Opus by signing up for our newsletter on our website. Christina, Cierra, Alfredo, thank you for your time and your expertise. You really made this a very rewarding session. And I will see you all again soon. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.